All right, yo, listen up, everybody. I absolutely need to tell you about what went down yesterday on SportsCenter because it was genuinely one of the most comprehensive and roster movement-heavy discussions about the New York Giants' multiple transactions and devastating injury updates that I've witnessed all season long, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that Scott Van Pelt, Stephen A. Smith, Tim Legler, and the entire panel spent nearly 3 hours meticulously dissecting the breaking news that the Giants claimed wide receiver Ryan Miller off waivers from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, adding depth to an incredibly thin receiver room, the lengthy injury report coming out of the bye week with key players in various stages of recovery, the absolutely devastating update on Thibodeaux, who hasn't played since Week 10 against Chicago and may not play again this entire season, which would mean missing essentially half the year for the 5th overall pick. The special teams roster move, bringing back Xavier Gibson as punt returner after he'd been released earlier and spent time with the Jets. Punter Jamie Gillen being injured on that disastrous botched field goal attempt against the Patriots when he kicked the turf instead of the ball. And most explosively, the Marcus Freeman head coaching rumors that continue heating up every single day with reports from Connor Orr and Anthony Rivardo confirming the Giants hold Freeman in high regard and are looking for a CEO-type coach, which Freeman represents coming from Notre Dame's pro-style operation. And the way they methodologically evaluated everything from why the Giants are so desperately thin at receiver after not taking the position seriously in the offseason, to whether Thibodeaux's contract situation factors into the decision to potentially shut him down for the year, to the buyout complications with Freeman's Notre Dame contract being north of $10 million, to how Tyrone Tracy returning healthy could be a fantasy play against Washington's struggling defense, had everyone in the studio absolutely mesmerized, because this isn't just about making marginal roster adjustments. This is about the Giants recognizing their season is lost, and they need to start making decisions with 2025 in mind, from protecting injured franchise cornerstones like Thibodeaux, to evaluating young talent like Ryan Miller, to positioning themselves for the inevitable coaching change where Marcus Freeman represents the type of CEO leadership they desperately need. Hey, what's up, everyone? 1 second before we dive in, that like button right there, hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. So SportsCenter opens, and Scott Van Pelt has this absolutely breaking news intensity, like he's about to reveal multiple franchise-altering transactions, and SVP immediately establishes that the New York Giants have been extremely active making roster moves over the last couple of days, starting with claiming wide receiver Ryan Miller off waiver. And Van Pelt provides the background explaining that Miller played in 13 games this year for Tampa Bay Buccaneers, played in 11 games last year, and 1 game in 2023. He's 6'2", 220 pounds at 25 years old, went to Freeman, and was an undrafted free agent, and his production shows 2 receptions for 34 yards, with a touchdown on one of those grabs, which isn't huge numbers, but at least demonstrates he can produce when his number is called. Stephen A. Smith, who's always been incredibly critical of the Giants' roster construction, immediately jumps in talking about why this move was necessary, and Stephen A. explains that the Giants released Ray McCloud from their practice squad this week, and prior to adding Ryan Miller, they were dangerously thin at receiver, with just Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Jalen Hyatt on the roster when you look at the 53-man roster and healthy players. And Stephen A. makes this passionate point about Gunnar Olszewski leaving the game against New England a couple Mondays ago in what looked like a serious injury. And he thought immediately, does this mean the Giants could finally release Jalen Hyatt, who wasn't even active as part of the game day 48-man roster on Monday night? And if you're not going to play him but you're going to keep him on the 53-man roster, What are you even doing? You should be surrounding your young quarterback with quality NFL talent, not wasting roster spots on guys you don't trust. Tim Legler then provides some statistical context on Ryan Miller's production, and Legler reads that Miller had 12 catches for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns in the 2024 season. So while the numbers aren't massive, he's at least been able to contribute when opportunities arise. And Legler makes this observation that the Giants are having to piece together this wide receiver room on the fly. Because they didn't take the position seriously enough in the offseason, they signed Ray McCloud before signing Isaiah Hodgins. They released McCloud, and it took them until Week 12 to even sign Hodgins, which is just poor roster management and planning from top to bottom. But then Scott Van Pelt shifts to the injury report, which he says is lengthy as the Giants come back from their bye week, with multiple players who were banged up prior to the bye getting beat up in that Patriots game. And SVP starts with the positive news that Tyrone Tracy, who left that game injured, was a full participant at practice, which means he should play this week. And Van Pelt makes this interesting fantasy football observation that against a Washington defense that hasn't been stellar over the last month, Tracy could be a significant play for fantasy purposes. Plus, you're also going to see Dexter Lawrence and Cordale Flott back, with Darius Mustafa coming off IR, and Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, Joshua Ezeudu, and Corey Ballantyne were all full participants, showing good health across the board. Stephen A. Smith then addresses the limited participants, which include Theo Johnson, Tyler Nubin, and Gunnar Olszewski dealing with a concussion. And Stephen A. talks about how the Giants made another roster move on special teams, bringing back Xavier Gibson, the punt returner who was actually on this team earlier in the season, before they released him, and he went to either the Eagles or Jets. Stephen A. can't remember which green team, but he knows Gibson fumbled in a game for one of them, and Stephen A. explains that Gibson has a connection to the Giants' special teams coach, who spoke about him at the presser and had nothing but great things to say, so they're bringing back a familiar face who understands the system. But here's where the Sports Center discussion turns absolutely devastating, and Tim Legler addresses the Kayvon Thibodeaux situation, which looks increasingly bleak with each passing week. And Legler makes this somber observation that he doesn't think it's very likely Thibodeaux plays this week, and he may even go as far as saying not even again this entire year, which would be catastrophic for the 5th overall pick from the 2022 draft. And Legler breaks down the timeline, explaining that the last time Kayvon Thibodeaux played in a game was Week 10 against Chicago, so he's already missed 4 games plus the bye, which is 5 weeks total. And if this is Week 14 coming up, he'll have missed 4 weeks of actual game action, which is approaching half the season. Scott Van Pelt then makes what I thought was the most important point about the long-term considerations, and SVP talks about how at this point, the Giants should just shut Thibodeaux down for the year and get him right and healthy, because there's no need for him to go out there and potentially make the injury worse. And Van Pelt emphasizes that Thibodeaux has a contract situation on the line with his 5th-year option decision coming up, so the optics are not good that the 5th overall pick is injured and going to miss essentially the final 7 games of the season, which means missing almost half of the entire year. And that raises legitimate questions about his durability and availability moving forward, which factors into contract negotiation. Stephen A. Smith then addresses another injury situation that's almost comical in how it happened, and Stephen A. talks about punter Jamie Gillen, who got hurt on that disastrous botched snap on the field goal attempt to Jude McAtamney, where Gillen kicked the turf instead of the ball. And Stephen A. explains that Gillen actually hurt his knee on that play during the tackle attempt afterward, and the Giants have Cameron Johnston on their practice squad, who could be punting this Sunday against Washington if Gillen can't go, and Stephen A. just shakes his head, saying, "Bad news, Bears," because everything about this Giants season has been a disaster from top to bottom. But then the discussion shifts to what might be the most important topic for the Giants' future, which is the Marcus Freeman head coaching rumors. And Tim Legler introduces the latest reporting from Anthony Rivardo of Fireside Giants and Connor Orr from Sports Illustrated. And Legler reads the key details explaining that Marcus Freeman is held in high regard by the Giants and is generating plenty of interest from NFL teams. Connor Orr reported that Freeman has a CEO mindset and has many NFL-level responsibilities at Notre Dame, which is a program more closely aligned operationally to a pro team than any other NCAA club. And Legler makes this connection that the Giants are reportedly looking for a CEO-type coach this offseason, which makes Freeman a really interesting target, but the buyout in his contract is undisclosed, and likely north of $10 million, which raises questions about whether ownership would be willing to pay that. Scott Van Pelt then provides additional context about the Notre Dame Giants connections, and SVP talks about how there are ties between the organizations, with former Giants front office people having worked for Notre Dame previously. Plus, there's a massive crossover of Notre Dame fans who are also Giants fans, which creates natural interest in Freeman from the fan base. And Van Pelt makes this observation that Paul Schwartz also reported the Giants hold Marcus Freeman in high regard and respect him tremendously. So this isn't just speculation or random internet chatter. This is coming from legitimate beat reporters with actual sources inside the organization. Stephen A. Smith then raises what he thinks are the legitimate concerns about hiring Marcus Freeman. And Stephen A. talks about how Freeman would need to make two really good coordinator hires, since he'd need both an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, and he hasn't coached in the NFL before, which isn't necessarily a deal-breaker, but there would definitely be hurdles to overcome in terms of adjusting to the professional game. And Stephen A. makes this argument that the CEO model can work, as we've seen with guys like Dan Campbell and Mike Tomlin, who create culture and manage the big picture while empowering coordinators to run their units. But you absolutely need to nail those coordinator hires, or the whole thing falls apart, and Freeman, coming from college, would be taking a massive leap in terms of competition level and operational complexity. Tim Legler then makes what I thought was the most balanced observation about the Freeman candidacy, and Legler talks about how Notre Dame's program under Freeman really does operate more like a pro franchise than a traditional college program in terms of structure, resources, recruiting, which is basically free agency now with NIL and the transfer portal, so the transition might not be as dramatic as people think. And Legler emphasizes that Freeman has shown he can manage big egos and high expectations while developing young talent and creating winning culture, all of which translate to the NFL level. And his defensive background means he understands that side of the ball, which is increasingly rare among head coaching candidates who are predominantly offensive-minded these days. Scott Van Pelt then brings everything together with this comprehensive closing argument about why the Giants' roster moves and injury situations all point toward an organization that's already thinking about 2025. And SVP talks about how claiming Ryan Miller and bringing back Xavier Gibson are minor moves that help you finish out a lost season while evaluating young talent. Shutting down Kayvon Thibodeaux protects a franchise cornerstone from further injury in meaningless December game. And the Marcus Freeman rumors heating up indicate ownership and management are already having serious conversations about the next head coach, even though Brian Daboll technically still has the job. And Van Pelt makes this point that everything the Giants are doing right now, from roster management to injury decisions to coaching search preparations, shows an organization that has accepted this season is over and is trying to position itself for the inevitable reset that's coming in the offseason. What really struck me watching this entire SportsCenter segment was how comprehensively the panel covered every aspect of the Giants' current situation, from the immediate roster transactions, like claiming Ryan Miller and bringing back Xavier Gibson, to the devastating injury updates on Kayvon Thibodeaux potentially missing the rest of the season, to the punter situation with Jamie Gillen getting hurt on that botched field goal, to the Marcus Freeman coaching rumors that continue intensifying, with legitimate reporting from Connor Orr and Anthony Rivardo about the Giants' interest and Freeman's CEO qualities. And I think the clear consensus was, that New York is an organization in transition mode where they're making decisions with next year in mind rather than trying to salvage this lost season. And if they can successfully navigate the coaching search, landing someone like Marcus Freeman, who brings that CEO mindset and Notre Dame pro-style operational experience while protecting injured assets like Thibodeaux and evaluating young talent like Ryan Miller, they could position themselves for a legitimate turnaround in 2025 with a new coaching staff and hopefully healthier roster that can finally compete in the NFC East.